What happens when you stop explaining yourself to someone who is used to controlling the conversation? What happens when you stop checking in, stop defending yourself, stop asking for closure, and, most importantly, stop reaching out? At first, your silence may feel like the hardest thing you've ever done. You may wonder if they miss you. You may wonder if they're angry. You may even wonder if they have finally realized what they lost. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Silence doesn't always create the reaction you hope for. Sometimes it reveals something much more important. It reveals the relationship you were actually in. When you never reach out again, you remove something the narcissistic person may have relied upon. Your attention, your emotional availability, your reactions, and your willingness to keep the connection alive. And that's when the psychology becomes fascinating, because your silence isn't simply the absence of a message. It is the absence of access. In this speech, we're going to explore 7 things that may happen psychologically when you permanently stop reaching out. You'll learn why your silence can feel threatening to someone who depended on your attention, why they may suddenly remember you when they sense you're truly moving forward, why attempts to reconnect aren't always about genuine change, and why the greatest transformation may not happen in them at all. It may happen inside you. So stay with this entire speech, because the final realization is the one that can completely change how you understand silence. It isn't about making another person suffer. It isn't about winning a psychological game. It's about reaching the point where their reaction no longer determines your peace. The first thing a narcissistic person may realize when you never reach out again is that your attention is no longer guaranteed. In many unhealthy relationships, the person with narcissistic patterns becomes accustomed to having access to your emotions. They may be used to your messages, your explanations, your apologies, your attempts to repair the relationship, and even your anger. The important thing is that positive attention and negative attention can both keep a toxic dynamic alive. You may have believed that every argument was an opportunity to finally make them understand you. You explained your pain, you defended your intentions, you tried to clarify what happened. You hoped that if you found the right words, they would finally recognize the impact of their behavior. But when you stop reaching out, something changes. You remove yourself from the cycle. There are no more long explanations for them to dismiss, no more emotional reactions for them to provoke, no more repeated attempts to fix something that only one person was trying to repair. Your silence communicates something your words may never have been able to communicate. You are no longer available for the same pattern. This can be deeply uncomfortable for someone who became accustomed to your predictable attention. They may wonder why you aren't checking in, why you aren't asking for answers, or why you aren't trying to reconnect. But remember, your silence is not powerful because it hurts them. It is powerful because it protects you. You are no longer spending your emotional energy trying to convince someone to value you. You are no longer chasing understanding from someone who repeatedly chose not to understand. And slowly, you begin to realize that your attention is precious. It belongs to you. You can give it to your healing, your growth, your relationships, and your future. The moment you stop giving unlimited access to someone who repeatedly hurt you is often the moment you begin taking your own power back. The second thing a narcissistic person may realize when you never reach out again is that you are no longer emotionally predictable. In an unhealthy relationship, patterns often become very predictable. They may know exactly what happens after a disagreement. They may expect you to become upset, send a message, apologize, explain yourself, or eventually come back looking for answers. Over time, they can become familiar with your emotional responses and begin to rely on that predictability. They know that if they pull away, you may chase. If they become cold, you may try harder. If they ignore you, you may send another message asking what went wrong. But when you stop participating in that pattern, the dynamic changes. Suddenly, they don't know what you are going to do next. You aren't reacting in the way they expected. You aren't rushing to repair the connection. You aren't trying to convince them that you still care. You aren't providing the emotional response they may have become accustomed to receiving. And this is where silence becomes meaningful, not because you are trying to confuse or punish them, but because you are finally becoming clear about yourself. You are saying through your actions that you will no longer participate in a cycle that repeatedly damages your emotional well-being. This can also be a major turning point for you. At first, you may feel uncomfortable with your own silence. You may constantly fight the urge to check your phone or wonder whether they have noticed your absence. You may feel anxious because you are no longer following the familiar pattern. But with time, you begin to discover something important. You can feel the urge to reach out without acting on it. You can miss someone without returning to them. You can feel lonely without assuming that loneliness means you made the wrong decision. Eventually, your silence becomes less about what they are thinking and more about what you are learning. You are learning that you don't have to react every time someone pushes your emotional buttons. You don't have to explain yourself endlessly. You don't have to chase someone who chooses distance. And you don't have to remain predictable just to keep another person comfortable. Your emotional freedom begins when your behavior is guided by your values and boundaries rather than someone else's expectations. The third thing a narcissistic person may realize when you never reach out again is that they can no longer control the narrative between you. In a toxic relationship, you may have spent countless hours trying to explain what really happened. You wanted them to understand your intentions. You wanted them to acknowledge your pain. You wanted them to admit that their behavior hurt you. So you explained yourself again and again, hoping that if you found the right words, something would finally change. But sometimes, the more you explain, the more opportunities you give an unhealthy person to twist your words, dismiss your feelings, or turn the conversation back against you. You may find yourself defending things you never did, apologizing for feelings you were entitled to have, or questioning your own memory of events. When you stop reaching out, you stop supplying new material for that endless cycle. There are fewer conversations to manipulate, fewer emotional reactions to analyze, and fewer opportunities for you to be pulled back into confusion. Your silence doesn't necessarily prevent the other person from telling their own version of the story. They may still blame you. They may still portray themselves as the victim, but something important has changed. You are no longer participating in the courtroom of their approval. You no longer need to convince them that your experience was real. You begin to understand that your reality does not become invalid simply because someone refuses to acknowledge it. This can be a powerful part of healing. You stop asking yourself whether you could have communicated better, explained more clearly, or behaved differently. You begin to recognize that healthy communication requires two people who are willing to listen, reflect, and take responsibility. You cannot communicate your way into accountability with someone who is determined to avoid it. And you cannot spend your entire life presenting evidence to someone who has already decided what they want to believe. When you stop reaching out, you reclaim the right to define your own experience. You no longer need their agreement to know what you lived through. You can remember the good moments without ignoring the painful ones. You can acknowledge your mistakes without accepting blame for everything. Most importantly, you can stop allowing someone else's version of you to become your own identity. Your silence creates space for you to hear your own voice again, and sometimes that is where genuine clarity finally begins. The fourth thing a narcissistic person may realize when you never reach out again is that your silence may actually be permanent, or at least that you are no longer sitting around waiting for them to return. There is a significant difference between someone who is temporarily silent and someone who has genuinely begun to detach. Temporary silence often contains an expectation. You may be thinking, "I wonder when they will contact me," or "maybe they will finally apologize." You may still be watching your phone hoping for a message that proves they care, but genuine detachment begins when you stop waiting. You stop measuring your healing by whether they come back. You stop wondering whether they regret losing you. You simply begin moving forward with your life. This is often when the dynamic changes in a way you may not have expected. A person who once assumed that you would always be available may begin to recognize that the door is no longer automatically open. They may suddenly send a casual message, bring up an old memory, ask how you are doing, or appear to show concern. But this is where you have to become very careful. Contact does not automatically mean change. A message is not the same as accountability. Missing your presence is not necessarily the same as understanding how they hurt you. Wanting access to you is not proof that they are capable of offering you a healthy relationship. Sometimes people miss the comfort, attention, validation, or emotional support they received from you more than they miss the responsibility of truly knowing and respecting you. That is why you have to look beyond words. If someone returns, ask yourself whether their behavior has actually changed. Are they taking responsibility without blaming you? Are they respecting your boundaries even when they don't like them? Are they showing consistency instead of making temporary promises? Are they willing to reflect on their own behavior? These questions matter far more than a simple "I miss you." Your silence may eventually make someone realize that they no longer have guaranteed access to you. But the real question is whether you have realized that you don't have to give that access back. You don't owe anyone a return ticket into your life simply because they finally noticed your absence. The fifth thing a narcissistic person may realize when you never reach out again is that they can no longer rely on you to regulate their emotions. In many unhealthy relationships, one person slowly becomes responsible for managing the other person's emotional world. When they feel insecure, you reassure them. When they feel rejected, you chase them. When they become angry, you try to calm them down. When they pull away, you rush to repair the connection. Over time, you may become so focused on keeping them emotionally comfortable that you completely lose touch with your own needs. But when you stop reaching out, that entire dynamic begins to change. You are no longer immediately available to soothe every insecurity or fix every emotional crisis. You stop rushing back whenever they create distance. You stop feeling responsible for emotions that were never yours to carry. And this can reveal something very important. Another person's emotional stability was never supposed to depend entirely on you. You can care about someone without becoming responsible for their happiness. You can have compassion for their struggles without allowing those struggles to control your life. You can understand that someone has emotional wounds without accepting the idea that you must constantly suffer because of them. This can be especially difficult for empathetic people. You may find yourself wondering, what if they're hurting, or what if they need me? But caring about someone's pain does not mean you have to return to a relationship that repeatedly damaged your emotional well-being. Compassion does not require unlimited access to you. When you stop reaching out, you begin to understand the difference between love and emotional responsibility. Healthy love allows two people to manage their own emotions while supporting each other. It does not require one person to constantly rescue, reassure, or sacrifice themselves. Your silence may therefore reveal that the relationship depended heavily on your emotional labor. But more importantly, it gives you the opportunity to stop carrying what was never yours and start investing that emotional energy back into yourself. The sixth thing a narcissistic person may realize when you never reach out again is that you are capable of building a life without them. This can be one of the most difficult truths to accept after a toxic relationship, because when you are emotionally attached to someone, it can feel as though the relationship has become the center of your entire world. You may wake up thinking about them, go to sleep thinking about them, and spend your entire day analyzing what they said, what they meant, and what they might do next. Your emotional energy becomes focused on their behavior rather than your own life. But when you stop reaching out, something slowly begins to shift. The space that was once occupied by anxiety and constant overthinking starts to become available for something else. You begin reconnecting with friends you may have neglected. You start focusing on your work, your goals, your health, and your interests. You may rediscover parts of yourself that became buried while you were trying to survive the relationship. At first, this process can feel strange. You may even feel guilty for enjoying yourself. You might wonder if moving forward means you never cared. But healing does not erase what you felt. It simply means that your past no longer controls your present. Eventually, you may realize that the life you once believed you could not have without that person is still possible. You can laugh again. You can make plans without considering their reaction. You can experience peace without waiting for the next conflict. And you can begin to understand that your happiness does not need to be witnessed by the person you left behind. This is important because real healing is not about creating a perfect image of yourself to make someone jealous. You don't need to post your success, display your happiness, or prove that you are doing better. The deepest transformation happens privately. It happens when you no longer need them to notice your growth. If they eventually realize that you have built a meaningful life without them, that realization belongs to them. Your responsibility is not to make them regret losing you. Your responsibility is to make sure you never lose yourself again. The greatest victory is not being missed by someone who hurt you. It is becoming so connected to your own life that you no longer need their attention to feel complete. The seventh and deepest thing a narcissistic person may realize when you never reach out again is that your silence may not change them, but it can completely change you. This is the realization that matters most, because there is a danger in making your healing dependent on another person's reaction. You may spend months wondering whether they regret losing you, whether they miss you, whether they finally understand what they did, or whether they will eventually come back with an apology. But if your peace depends on receiving those answers, then you are still emotionally connected to them. You may have stopped speaking to them, but internally, you are still waiting for them to give you closure. The real transformation begins when you no longer need their realization to validate your experience. You stop asking, when will they understand what they lost, and begin asking, when did I finally understand what I deserve? That is a completely different question. It moves your attention away from their behavior and brings it back to your own life. You begin to understand that someone does not have to admit they hurt you for your pain to be real. They do not have to apologize for your boundaries to be valid. They do not have to regret losing you for your decision to leave to be the right one. Sometimes, the person who hurt you may never develop the insight you hoped for, and accepting that can be painful. But it can also be incredibly freeing, because once you stop waiting for their transformation, you become free to focus on your own. Your silence is no longer a strategy designed to get a reaction. It becomes a boundary that protects your emotional health. You are no longer checking whether they noticed your absence. You are no longer measuring your worth by whether they come back. You are simply choosing yourself again and again every day. And eventually, you may reach the point where their reaction doesn't matter anymore. Their messages don't control your emotions. Their silence doesn't create anxiety. Their approval doesn't define your worth. Their regret doesn't determine your healing. You have returned to yourself. And that may be the most powerful realization of all. The purpose of silence was never to make another person feel your absence. It was to give you enough space to finally feel your own presence again. So what does a narcissistic person realize when you never reach out again? They may realize that your attention was never guaranteed. They may realize that your emotional reactions are no longer available on demand. They may realize that the old cycle cannot continue without your participation. They may realize that your boundaries are real. They may even realize that you are building a life that no longer includes them. But here's the most important truth. You cannot control what another person realizes. You cannot force insight. You cannot force accountability. You cannot force someone to become the person you needed them to be. What you can control is whether you continue abandoning yourself in the hope that someone else will finally appreciate you. Sometimes silence is not about making someone miss you. Sometimes silence is about finally hearing yourself, your own thoughts, your own needs, your own intuition, your own truth. And perhaps the most powerful moment comes when you stop asking, when will they realize what they lost? And you start asking, when did I finally realize what I deserve? That is the moment the story changes, because the ultimate purpose of no contact isn't to make another person feel your absence. It's to help you feel your own presence again. And when you reach that point, their silence doesn't control you. Their messages don't control you. Their apologies don't control you. Even their regret doesn't control you. You have returned to yourself. And once you truly understand the value of your own peace, you stop reaching backward. Not because you're trying to punish anyone, but because you finally understand that your future deserves more of your attention than your past ever did.